Hello, and first off, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out of your day to be willing to listen and hopefully learn about the topic I plan to share with you today. My name is Vang Hang, and this topic that I have chosen is mostly to take part in a narrative PowerPoint presentation for my Western Civilizations class I have at Muskegon Community College. The course is taught by Professor Maniatis, and the topic that I will be covering today is the topic of the Second Persian War during the Greek period. The specific time period will be revealed soon, so please stick around for that. Later on, I will be also returning to this every slide to cover why the specific photo was chosen for that slide. But let us begin and to learn more about and expand the knowledge of the Second Persian War. To begin with the knowledge, it is very important to get into the 5 W's, I would say. The usual of who, where, why, what, and of course when. With the map provided to you, I would like to point out who is going to be taking part in this war primarily. There is the Persian Empire on the right side of this map, and a sum of Greek city-states that are looking to combat the Persians. However, there is a twist that will be spoken about later on involving the city-states. Now, there are 2 things to look out for, so I hope that I can get the information to you as the best as I can. Second invasion was primarily due to the cause of wanting to get revenge for the first invasion that happened under the rule of Darius, and this is for Persia. However, we will not be covering that first war. The rule of Xerxes led to this second invasion, and he actually was the son of Darius, and that was one of the reasons that revenge was wanted. He wanted to get revenge for his father. Xerxes did, in fact. There's another reason that could be found to be a very crucial statement that Xerxes actually wanted to accomplish, but I will not spoil that too much. It has to involve the city of Athens, so watch out for that when we get to that topic. Lastly, for this section of this slide, I wanted to speak about the expansion of the Persian Empire. At that time, Persia was one of the most significant civilizations of its time. It resembled so much of the greatest ancient civilizations before it, and even Egypt. And this was stated by Christopher Brooks in the Humanite Hebrew text book. Not getting too far ahead, I will return to the slide at the end when all the information is processed, but this is the 4th W that has to be brought in as the what has to be spoken about. These 3 main points are excruciatingly important, especially the second bulleted point within this list. However, we will return at the end, like I said, as it will make more sense. And of course, there's only so far that I can move ahead on this timeline in order to give you the information correctly. The last W, most definitely not the end, of course. There are no doubts about when the second invasion happened. Some sources include the planning stages, but this is the time period, specifically the 480 BCE portions, are when the war was actually set and on its way to happening. Throughout this presentation, I will be returning to the slide and checking off mentally with you what battles happened and what ways the Persians planned to work their way through the ancient world, and more importantly for Xerxes to fulfill all of his goals. In the modern day, you could say with this photo it does not help the presentation of the slide. However, this is the exact point where the march happened for the Persians. According to the Chronicle of the Fall, the Hellespont is where the march began, and as I spoke about earlier, in the modern view, is exactly this photo, where it started. Back in those times with the visual representation that I plan to show later on, I sure to prove that this is exactly the spot where it truly began to not just be an idea in Xerxes' mind, but it was a given. So I said I would return to the map, so let's return to that real quick. And the Hellespont, as you can see, that's where the march really began on the map. When there is some land, there is water, of course, and the Persians were prepared for both of these factors, and they planned tirelessly, which will be pointed out more later on. Let's return to the map and see the path they planned to take on the water just briefly. As you can see, the water path is the solid line, and yeah, it basically started at Hellespont as well. Moving onwards, there truly was a war in the beginning, perhaps throughout till the very end. That was leading this concept. Though what was leading this concept more was the battle of freedom and survival versus the expansion of an empire and conquest. The Greeks did not start the war, not the second one, in fact, because it was most definitely certain that Xerxes wanted more than anything. In the ancient history source book provided by Fordham University that goes into Herodotus in the histories book that he had made, he even said that Xerxes said the exact quote. And Herodotus said, and I quote, "I am bent upon this war, and I see likewise therewith no few advantages." He was bent on it, and he had some reasons, as I said earlier on, towards the beginning of this presentation. But how exactly did he prepare his army? Excuse me. As I spoke about earlier, the Hellespont had a makeshift bridge made, and it was not for some of the small uprisings. And if it was not for some of the small uprisings within the modern Asia Minor area, for the Persians, perhaps the war would have started sooner. But in the end, it probably helped Xerxes, regardless, to get prepared more with a numbers advantage. Going back to the source of Christopher Brooks, he speaks about how there were as many as 200,000 soldiers, 1,200 ships. The number at the time was believed to be in the millions, supposedly, but modern historians agree that thousands is more accurate of a representation. Also, although the numbers may have been prepared in terms of soldiers and ships, there is a factor that perhaps Xerxes did not account for in his preparation, and that was the factor of health among eating that was going to have to happen for his army. According to the journal article provided by Jack Martin Bowser in his article titled "The Persian War Against Greece: A Resentment," along the initial march, the supply shortages and the shortages of food would soon become an issue once the army had passed Thessaly. And to get back to the map, I will show you a picture of Thessaly, and that is when they would start to have problems with their food. And once they get past Thessaly, that's where the first major battle happens, and that's what I'll be getting into now. After I get to how the Allies prepared. And the Allies had just gone through the First Persian War, and since they were victorious, that is most likely another reason why Xerxes probably wanted to get revenge and to avenge that first loss by his father. But they were also ready to be prepared for a second one as well. Athens primarily had a 200 ship fleet after the day they had struck silver in the aftermath of the First War. This is according to the source of the peoplehse.edu website. Going more into the sides of both armies, so to speak, I mentioned earlier a little bit about a twist that was to come involving some of the city-states. And as shown here within this slide and with more information provided from Brooks, he speaks about how there were actually 6% of city-states in the northeastern area that already gave into submission that the Persians made, as the Persians made their way into those cities. And those cities are some of these names included, and if I show you the map again, you can find those names on the cities, such as Thracian, even Thessaly, those were some of the cities-states that already gave into submission. And then the most famous battle would probably soon be upon this war. The first battle, in fact, that's actually covered. The Battle of Thermopylae, in my very opinion, I have to say, when you mention Spartans and the connection with the Persians, Persian War specifically, the Second War, this battle is synonymous and stuck within the history books as seen from here on out. There will mostly be a battle on land and within the water as expected, although this is the Battle of Thermopylae, so it would be on the land, of course. The Spartans fought off the Persians for 3 days. Perhaps they could have lasted even longer. Maybe not end the war, but prolong it more along the lines of maybe, who knows, 7 days or so. If it were not for the Greek that was hired by the Persians, who betrayed King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, they were scratching fine to survive. Probably in the end, they could have done so much more, like I said. In the end of this, though, on a good note, as noted by the book by 50 Minutes, Leonidas was and is widely admired in the history books along with his Spartans. Although maybe Xerxes was not that bad himself as a king, because he reared all his men except 8,000, according to the book written as A History of Greece. The most famous battle would soon be upon this war. Oh, sorry, I just covered that. As the news broke that the Battle of Thermopylae happened, the battle at the Strait of Artemisium had finally broken down for the Greeks, and the Greeks had to retreat and withdrew. So Salamis, even with the numbers of the Persians already gone down even before before the naval battle even happened. According to the historyofwar.org, the storm had taken out at least 400 warships and even supply ships. But that's also not even to mention the ships that simply got lost. But the battle was won regardless for the Persians. At this point, it does not look too well for the Greeks, and they lost Thermopylae and Artemisium. And this led to the takeover of Boeotia and Attica falling to the Persian army. And most importantly, I would say, would be the third reason that Xerxes wanted it. This war. And like I said, we would come back to it, and it involves Athens. And here it is, the burning of one of the most major city-states. And another major loss for the Greeks, although most of them Greek citizens had already abandoned the city in advance. Herodotus, who I referred to earlier on, was a writer during these ancient times and suggested the fire may have even been accidental. Even this was according to the information provided by the archaeologist.org. But nonetheless, accidental or not, it was said that the Greeks were demoralized, burnt out. Sorry, bad pun, but just had to say it, as they were just devastated. Although some tried to fight, there was no use in the end, and ultimately another retreat happened with the Greeks. Xerxes pledged to not rest until he had taken and burnt Athens, and he did exactly that. Even if it wasn't his fault, he still accomplished what he wanted. All hope was not lost, though. It could not be lost, not until the last city-state had fallen, and Corinth was still had the majority of the city-states retreat to that specific area, which was most definitely a positive with the retreats. At the isthmus at Corinth, there was a wall that had helped, and it blocked Corinth temporarily in an attack. With the winter coming soon, that also helped. The turning point of the war could soon be put on the horizon as the Battle of Salamis was about to happen and the Greeks were about to have their luck changed. Some may even have praised Poseidon. Moving on, the channel of water where this battle happened simply was not enough room for the Persian ships to gain an advantage, although it was still a 3 to 5 ship difference. The Greeks were able to flank and won this victory. Even with the eyes of Xerxes actually watching upon the hill, he would soon retreat though, as he felt like he might have been trapped in Europe and he had to retreat back to the safety of the homeland in Asia Minor. And this left his best general to take care of the remaining army and lead them to a last stand. And this most definitely was going to be the last stand, as the Greeks were no longer playing around with their army. The city-states had gone into a more hoplite and more shield-oriented use of battle gear. In fact, the main reason the hoplites were named that name was loosely based on the shields they used for battle, and with the summer soon to not forget for the Greeks, the final battle was upon them. But before we get to that, let's return to the slide where I talked about, you can see the path, and let's look at all the battles that happened so far, such as the battle at Thermopylae, the battle at Artemisium, and of course the recent battle which happened towards Corinth. And this is the last battle, one of the last battles at least on land in the history books. And this was titled A Decisive Battle by Livius.org. Once the side of the water was crossed within the battlefield by the Persians, the phalanx of the remaining Spartans struck, and they took down the numbers of the Persians. More importantly, they took down the best general that the Persians had, in Mardius, which I mentioned earlier on. All while the Athenians took the Persian camp that was within the area as well. At last, the battle which sealed the deal, and this was on water, so the Battle of Mycale was actually the only battle listed that took part in this war that was within the Persian Empire area, which they originally had. As shown within this photo, there was a naval battle and the Persian army was destroyed when the Greeks destroyed the last remaining navy. And now let's return to that path for the Persians the last time and see all the paths that occurred for the Persians. Of course, there was no treaty signed as of yet, but the Greeks took a victory and a serpent statue was made as a celebration. But that was only after a few several months at the Battle of Plataea. The Greek city-states, and primarily the Athens, did go on a low defensive, offensive streak now against the Persians. That was till finally the peace treaty was signed, which was the Peace of Calais, which was made to finally end the bloodshed. Before I go into the credits and the work side for the information that I have given you, I want to relate back to some points that I spoke about earlier. Some of the beginning slides and more specifically the what for this war. And of course the explanations for the photos that were picked as slide representation. Even though some of them may seem self-explanatory, I would like to usher my own response on it. This war really led to the stopping of the Persian invasion that was dramatically accelerating and affecting the Western world. If this war did not happen, who knows? And if the Greeks did not win, in fact, who knows how far they would have expanded, how different the world would look today. And Xerxes did not want to stop expanding it, so this war was really important. And it did not go his way, as you can see. But what also did not go his way was the leagues that were made just to defend from the Persians and the overall border. The Delian League, the Peloponnesian League, broke down and led to another set of wars. Of course it did. Which I can only say was not that true of a cause to start even a war over. So first off, let's get into the photo credits. And there is 4 slides of it because there was a lot of photo credits that needed to take place. The first source is the source that covers the serpent column. The second source is and the reason I chose the serpent column was just because it looked interesting, and I really showed that whenever some major war happens, at least, mostly there's an artifact that is made, so that's pretty significant, I'd say. The second source was just about the ships, and that is the battle that happened around the Battle of Salamis. The third source is the photo that showed the sea photo that was taken for that water path photo. And I chose that just because I just wanted to show the water source. Yeah. And the fourth source is I chose that due to the way that it showed the entire map. Then onto the next slide. This is the source for the first photo used in the first slide, which was the Spartans, and I just looked at that amazing artwork, so I used it. The second source on this slide is just the photo of Xerxes. Just want to show how he looked like. Third source on this slide is another map, and maps throughout this presentation are helpful to spread the information, I think. So there is a lot of maps that I used, and that could be my main reason to show significance and the way that most of the battles happened. Athens burning, of course, was the fourth source, and that was a photo that was shown on the burning of Athens. And another map with the history vault.ie. And moving on to this third slide for the images, Battle of Salamis again. And this second source was actually the photo that was shown with Xerxes on his throne in a way. And I showed that just because it looked like an interesting piece of artwork. Another map for this third source on this slide. And yeah, so the fourth source on the slide is also another map at the bottom. Well, not really a map, excuse me. It's the Battle of Thermopylae photo that I showed. And the fifth source on the slide is the photo of the modern day strait, which I showed was the land path. And the last source on the slide is yet another map. And yeah, so we go to the last image slide for the sources, and this is another map. And another map. And then for this third source, this is where you saw the armor of the hoplites. And there's the Battle of Thermopylae and the Battle of Salamis pick, which was like just another battle photo that helped to show that battle. Photo that showed the battle, excuse me. And lastly, it's another map. Actually, no, it's that diagram for the battle for the hoplites, my bad. So the Spartan obelisk pick was actually used for a different slide. And the Spartan pick is pretty obvious with how synonymous they are with the war and the impact they had on the overall battle. They just had to be showcased in the first slide, and that is what most people know about the war in general. It's just that the Spartans were involved. The second photo is just to show the map. And maps are useful, majorly useful, and that's why I decided to include most of them throughout this slide, especially on the second one where it shows basically both sides. The third side is just to show Xerxes and what he looked like as an interpretation during this time. And the path, that's the slide that I kept going back to, and I just enjoyed using the photo for it. The modern day straits, very important, and it showed what it would look like in modern day, but you can imagine how it was back in the day also, when they had the crosslet. And then you got Xerxes again, but in a more statuized form. Then we have the Persian preparation slide, which shows basically the bridge that was made with the platoons. And another Spartan pick, my apologies, and I chose that due to the fact that the Spartans still, I have to say, majorly impactful throughout this war. The Battle of Thermopylae photo, that just had to do with the Spartans again, and showed the battle artwork that was made. Straight art museum, and it just shows it because it showed the city of Salamis also, which was an important part of the battle. And the aftermath of the two battles, this showed basically the city of Issues of files such as Boeotia and Attica. Try to include those to get you a more specific view. The artist's rendition of the city of Athens burning, I think it just shows emotion, so I wanted to get that across and show that photo for that slide. And I couldn't find a photo really to help show Corinth in the Isthmus of Corinth, so I used that one for the halted effort slide. Battle of Salamis, pretty self-explanatory. Like I said, there would be some photos that are self-explanatory, and that's why I chose that one. Mardonius, and I chose this photo of him, so that, I don't know if I mentioned that earlier on, but that is a photo statue of him, and that's why I included it. The whole plate's armor, just to show that the Greek city-states weren't playing around. Plateau of Plataea, and it's showcased on the bottom left. I also don't know if I included that earlier on, but I'm mentioning it now. That's also why I include that photo specifically, because no other map really showed that. Mikhail is on the right side, and it's by the Persian Empire, as I said. One of the pretty much only battles that happened around that Persian Empire area, so I had to include that. And yes, I already touched upon the serpent statue, but I just wanted to reiterate all of the photos and why they were chosen again. Getting into the work cited. This first, the archaeologist I spoke about, that with the burning of Athens. And then I mentioned Jack Martin Baker and the Persian Wars against Greece resentment earlier on. Cartwright, and that was basically another information website where I got most of the information about the overall battles. Then, yeah, the same for the fourth source. And the fifth source really helped with about Democles as it states, and that's by Michael A. Flower. And George Grote, he made the history of Greece, which I mentioned earlier on in the presentation. And Livius.org, I also mentioned that. And that was speaking about Plataea in that battle. And lastly, it was the people.hsc.edu, which I mentioned earlier on in one of the slides about one of the battles, and Richard J. That is another source that helped with the Battle of Museum, as it states. Source books, I mentioned that earlier on as well, which helped get me more information for the majority of the slides. And the Persian War, Portland Community College, that is a source by Brooks, which I mentioned also a lot throughout the presentation, so that was helpful. And the Battle of Thermopylae, the Fall of Leonidas, the first and the 300 Spartans, that is the 5 minute, 50 minutes one, and that is a book. And also the second book, which was from, that was from George and George Grote, sorry. I was looking for that. And overall, that was my narrative presentation, and thank you for taking the time out of your day again to watch this, and I hope, watch and listen, I mean, maybe just listen, and I hope that you learned something about the Second Persian War and found it interesting like I did. And I chose this topic mostly because just the Battle of the 300 Spartans is like inspiring, and that's just the reason I decided to do it. So again, thank you, and I hope that you enjoyed this presentation.